Mila's legs burned as she tore through the frozen forest, her bare feet cutting against ice and stone, her breath coming out in white clouds that vanished behind her almost as fast as she made them. Somewhere behind her, she could still hear the pack howling her name, calling her back, calling her a coward, calling her theirs. She did not stop. She could not stop. If she stopped, they would drag her back to Kellen, and Kellen would finish what he started that morning when he grabbed her wrist in front of the entire pack and told everyone she belonged to him now, whether she wanted it or not. She had spent her whole life being told she was less than the betas, less than the warriors, less than anyone with a rank that mattered. And Omega was supposed to be quiet, obedient, grateful for whatever scraps of kindness came her way. Mila had tried to be all of those things for 22 years, and it had earned her nothing but bruises she hid under long sleeves, and a future she never chose for herself. The snow came down harder now, swirling in sharp gusts that stung her cheeks and blurred the world into a wall of white. She had no plan beyond escape, no map, no food, no idea where the pack borders ended. All she had was the desperate need to put distance between herself and the life that had been decided for her without her consent. Her foot caught on a root hidden beneath the snow, and she went down hard, scraping her palms against frozen ground. For a moment she stayed there, chest heaving, tears freezing on her lashes before they could even fall. She thought about staying down, about letting the cold take her instead of Kellen. It would almost be easier. Then she heard it again, distant but unmistakable, the sound of pursuit. Someone was still following her trail. Mila forced herself back to her feet. She would not go back. Not now, not ever. She pressed a hand against a nearby tree to steady herself, and kept moving, deeper into territory she did not recognize, deeper into cold that no longer felt like an enemy, but like the only thing offering her freedom. Hours passed, or maybe it only felt that way. Time became strange when every part of her body ached and her thoughts grew slower, heavier, wrapped in a fog that she distantly recognized as danger. She had heard stories of travelers who froze to death thinking they were warm, who lay down in the snow certain they only needed rest. She wondered, almost calmly, if that was happening to her now. It was the smell of smoke that pulled her back from the edge. Faint at first, carried on the wind in broken threads, then stronger, real, undeniable. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Somewhere close, someone had built a fire, and right now, that was the only thing in the world Mila cared about. She followed the scent with the last of her strength, stumbling between trees that all looked the same, until the forest opened into a small clearing and she saw it. A cabin, low and sturdy, built from thick, dark timber, with a curl of gray smoke rising from its chimney into the falling snow. Warm light glowed behind a single window, soft and golden against the endless white. For a moment, Mila simply stood there, certain her mind was playing a cruel trick on her, showing her comfort only to snatch it away. But the cold biting into her skin was real, and the cabin did not disappear when she blinked. She staggered forward, no longer caring whose home this was, no longer caring about anything except reaching that door before her body gave out completely. She did not knock. She did not have the strength left for manners or hesitation. She pushed against the door, found it unlocked, and half fell, half walked into the warmth inside, collapsing just past the threshold onto a wooden floor that felt, after so many hours in the snow, like the softest bed she had ever known. The room around her swam in and out of focus. A stone fireplace crackled with a low fire. Thick furs were draped over a wide chair near the hearth. The air smelled of pine, of wood smoke, and faintly of something else, something wild and warm, that made her instincts stir even through her exhaustion, though she was too drained to understand why. Mila crawled toward the fire on hands and knees, desperate to be closer to its heat, and there, with the flames casting flickering light across her frost-bitten skin, her body finally gave out. Her eyes slipped shut. The last thought she had before darkness took her was that she had made it. Whatever came next, at least she was not out there in the cold anymore. She had no way of knowing that the cabin did not belong to some quiet hermit or forgotten trapper. She had no way of knowing that she had wandered far past her own pack's borders and deep into territory ruled by a name whispered with fear across every pack in the region. She had no way of knowing that she had just fallen asleep, uninvited and unclaimed, inside the private retreat of the most powerful Alpha King in the north. All she knew, in the last flicker of consciousness before sleep claimed her completely, was warmth. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, something close to safety. Outside, the storm raged on, erasing her footprints from the world, sealing the path behind her, as if the forest itself had decided she should never be able to find her way back to the life she left behind. The wind screamed through the trees, but inside the cabin, wrapped in firelight and silence, Mila slept. She did not dream of Kellen, or of the pack, or of the fear that had chased her through the dark. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she dreamed of nothing at all, her mind finally allowed to rest. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The fire burned low, then someone unseen fed it fresh wood, though Mila never stirred enough to notice the shift in the air, the faint change in scent, the presence that had entered the cabin sometime after midnight and gone utterly still at the sight of the stranger asleep on the floor. Powerful eyes studied her from the shadows near the door for a long moment, taking in her torn clothes, her frost-reddened skin, the way her body curled instinctively toward the fire even in sleep, seeking warmth the way a lost creature seeks safety. There was no anger in that gaze, though anger would have been the expected response to finding an unfamiliar Omega inside private, heavily guarded territory. Instead, there was something quieter, more startling, an awareness that struck deep and old, something that had not been felt in a very long time. Whoever watched her did not wake her, not yet. There would be time for questions when morning came, when the fire had done its work and warmed the ice from her limbs, when she was strong enough to explain how she had ended up so far from wherever she called home. For now, the watcher simply stood in the dim light, silent and still, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over the stranger who had, without any way of knowing it, walked straight into the heart of the most dangerous territory in the land. The fire cracked softly. Snow continued to fall outside, thick and steady, burying the world in white. And somewhere beneath the surface of her exhausted sleep, Mila's instincts, the same instincts that had once told her to run, now whispered something different. They told her, faintly, that here, in this strange cabin she had stumbled into by accident, she was no longer in danger. She could not have been more wrong, and yet somehow, impossibly, she could not have been more right. Morning arrived slowly, gray light creeping through the single window and spreading across the wooden floor. Mila woke to the sensation of warmth pressed against her back, a heavy fur blanket someone had draped over her sometime during the night, though she had no memory of it happening. Her body ached in ways she had never felt before, muscles stiff from cold and exhaustion, but she was alive, and she was warm, and for a moment she simply lay there, unwilling to move, unwilling to break whatever fragile peace had settled over her. Then her mind caught up with her surroundings, and panic flooded through her all at once. This was not her room. This was not her pack's territory. She had no memory of where she was, or how deeply she had trespassed into land that was not her own. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar cabin, searching for any sign of danger. The fire had been rebuilt sometime while she slept, burning steady and bright in the stone hearth. Someone had left a folded blanket beside her, along with a cup of water on the small table nearby. Someone had been here. Someone had taken care of her while she slept, defenseless and unaware. Mila's heart pounded as she scrambled to her feet, testing her legs, relieved to find they still worked despite the punishment of the night before. She moved toward the window, hoping to get some sense of where she had ended up, but all she could see was endless forest buried beneath fresh snow, no sign of any pack markings, no indication of whose land this belonged to. She was still standing there, frozen with uncertainty, when the front door opened. Cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the scent of pine and something darker, something that made every instinct in Mila's body go completely still. She turned toward the doorway, and the breath left her lungs entirely. The man standing there was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an unmistakable presence that seemed to fill the entire cabin the moment he stepped inside. His dark hair was dusted with melting snow, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room, And when those eyes finally landed on her, Mila felt something in her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and something she could not name. He did not look surprised to see her there. He looked, if anything, deeply curious, studying her the way someone might study a puzzle they had not expected to find on their doorstep. "You are trespassing," he said finally, his voice low and even, carrying an authority that made the hair on Mila's arms rise. "Do you understand where you are right now?" Mila's mouth went dry. She shook her head slowly, too afraid to speak, too aware of the danger radiating off this stranger in waves she could almost physically feel. "This is my territory," he continued, stepping further into the cabin, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded final. "My name is Draven, and you, little Omega, have just walked straight into the heart of it." The name meant nothing to Mila in that moment, though it would come to mean everything in the days that followed. All she understood, standing there in a stranger's cabin with nowhere left to run, was that she had escaped one danger only to land herself directly in the path of another, one far more powerful than anything she had left behind. She braced herself for anger, for punishment, for the kind of treatment she had come to expect from anyone stronger than herself. Instead, Draven's expression shifted into something far more unsettling than rage. He tilted his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent properly for the first time, and something crossed his face that looked almost like disbelief. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone quieter now, less commanding, though no less intense. "Mila," she whispered, barely able to force the word out. He repeated it softly, testing the sound of it, and something about the way he said her name sent a strange warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire behind her. She did not understand what was happening, why this powerful stranger was looking at her as though she were something precious rather than an intruder to be punished. She would not understand it fully for some time yet. But standing there in the golden morning light, snow still melting from his shoulders, Draven looked at her the way no one had ever looked at her before, and somewhere deep inside her exhausted, frightened heart, something ancient and unfamiliar began, very quietly, to wake up. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The fire crackled steadily between them, filling the silence, while outside the storm finally began to ease, leaving behind a world blanketed in fresh, undisturbed snow. Mila had run from one life the night before, desperate and afraid, with no destination in mind beyond simple survival. She had never imagined she might run straight into the beginning of another one entirely. Draven did not press her with more questions that first morning. Instead, he moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, adding wood to the fire, setting a pot of something warm to simmer over the flames, all while Mila stood frozen near the window, unsure whether she was allowed to sit, to speak, or even to breathe too loudly. Every instinct she had built over years of survival told her that a powerful alpha, finding an unfamiliar Omega on his land, should have ended in violence, or at the very least in harsh punishment. Instead, he handed her a bowl of warm broth and gestured toward the chair nearest the fire. "Eat," he said simply. "You will not be able to answer my questions if you collapse first." Mila took the bowl with trembling hands, too hungry and too cold to refuse, though she kept her eyes on him the entire time, waiting for the moment his patience would run out. It did not come. He settled into the chair across from her, close enough to watch her carefully, far enough to give her space, and waited in silence while she ate. When she finally set the empty bowl aside, he studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Tell me how you ended up on my land in the middle of a storm, barefoot, with no supplies and no companions." The question hung in the air between them, and Mila felt her throat tighten. She had spent so long hiding the truth of her life, smoothing over the bruises and the cruelty, with careful smiles, whenever anyone from outside the pack asked how she was treated. But something about the steady, unflinching way Draven watched her made lying feel impossible. "I ran away," she admitted quietly. "From my pack. I did not know this was your land. I did not know where I was going at all. I just knew I could not stay." Draven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that her words had affected him. "Why did you run?" Mila hesitated, old habits urging her to stay silent, to protect the pack that had never once protected her. but she was so tired of protecting people who had never cared for her in return. Because I was going to be forced into a bond I did not choose, she said finally. Because I have spent my whole life being told I am worth less than everyone around me, and I could not do it anymore. Something shifted in Draven's expression, something dark and controlled, though his voice remained calm when he spoke again. No Omega should ever be forced into a bond against their will. Whoever told you that you were worth less than anyone else was wrong, and you were right to run from them. Mila blinked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, with such simple, unwavering conviction. She did not know what to do with the warmth that spread through her chest at his words, so she looked away instead, staring into the fire, until the sting behind her eyes faded. You are welcome to stay here until the storm passes completely, and the roads are safe again, Draven said after a moment. After that, you may decide for yourself what you wish to do. I will not force anything upon you that you do not choose freely. It should have been simple relief that Mila felt at his offer, but instead, there was something more complicated tangled up in it, a wary hope she did not trust herself to feel. She had learned the hard way that kindness from those in power often came with hidden costs. Why would you help me? She asked carefully. You do not know me. I trespassed on your land. Draven considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because turning away someone who is suffering, simply because helping them is inconvenient, is not the kind of alpha I choose to be. He paused, something more unspoken lingering behind his eyes. And because there is something about you, Mila, that I do not yet fully understand myself. She did not ask him to explain what he meant. Some part of her, buried deep beneath years of fear and self-doubt, already sensed the answer, even if she was not yet ready to name it. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Draven left each morning to attend to matters across his territory, though he never stayed away long, always returning before the light faded completely from the sky. Mila spent her days recovering, the warmth of the cabin slowly working the last of the cold from her bones, though the deeper wounds, the ones left by years of cruelty, proved far slower to heal. She learned small things about him during the quiet evenings they spent together by the fire, that he preferred silence to unnecessary conversation, but was never truly cold, only careful with his words, that he carried the weight of leading an entire territory, with a steadiness that spoke of years of hard-earned discipline, that despite his fearsome reputation, which she began to piece together through careful, hesitant questions, he never once raised his voice at her, never once made her feel smaller than she already felt. It was strange, learning to exist in a space where she was not constantly bracing for cruelty. Strange, and terrifying, and slowly, cautiously, something like comfort. One evening, as snow continued to fall steadily outside, Mila found herself watching Draven from across the small cabin as he repaired a torn strap on a piece of leather gear, his large hands moving with careful precision despite their obvious strength. She had not meant to stare, but something about the quiet concentration on his face held her attention until he glanced up and caught her watching. You are curious about me, he observed, not unkindly. Mila felt heat rise in her cheeks, caught off guard by how easily he read her. I am curious about a lot of things, she admitted. I have never met anyone like you before. And what kind of person do you think I am? He asked, setting the leather aside, giving her his full attention. She considered the question seriously, thinking back over the past several days, the quiet patience he had shown her, the way he never once made her feel like a burden despite the inconvenience of her sudden presence in his life. You are not what I expected an Alpha King to be, she said finally. Everyone always talks about power like it is the only thing that matters, but you do not use yours to make people afraid of you. Draven was quiet for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Power that requires fear to sustain it is not real strength, he said eventually. It is simply cruelty, wearing a different name. I learned that lesson a long time ago, in ways I do not particularly enjoy remembering. Mila wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the shadows that occasionally crossed his face when he spoke of his past, but she recognized the careful way he closed the subject, and she respected it, understanding better than most the instinct to protect old wounds from unnecessary exposure. As the fire burned lower that night, and the cabin settled into comfortable silence, Mila realized with quiet surprise that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel the constant, exhausting need to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Draven's presence, despite his obvious power, did not demand her diminishment. If anything, it seemed to invite the opposite, a slow, tentative permission to simply exist as herself. She was not yet ready to trust that feeling completely. Years of learned caution did not disappear in the span of a few peaceful days. But as she drifted toward sleep that night, wrapped in warm blankets before a steady fire, she found herself thinking, for the first time since fleeing into the storm, that perhaps she had not simply escaped one danger, only to stumble into another. Perhaps, impossibly, she had stumbled into something far closer to safety than she had ever known before. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the edges of the world, while inside the cabin, two people who had never expected to find each other settled slowly, cautiously, into the beginning of something neither of them yet understood, but both of them, in their own quiet ways, had already begun to feel. The storm finally broke on the fourth morning, leaving behind a world so bright and still that Mila almost forgot, for a moment, the danger that had brought her here in the first place. Sunlight poured through the cabin window, glinting off snow-heavy branches, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt strong enough to step outside without her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Draven watched her from the doorway as she stood in the clearing, tilting her face toward the pale winter sun, her eyes closed, her expression softer than he had yet seen it. He had spent the past several days quietly observing her, piecing together the fragments of her story she allowed herself to share, and with each new detail, his understanding of what she had survived grew heavier in his chest. She did not know it yet, but he had already begun making inquiries. Subtle ones, careful ones, sent through trusted messengers to gather what information he could about the pack she had fled. What he had learned in the short time since made his blood run cold with a fury he kept carefully hidden from her, unwilling to burden her further with anger she had not asked him to carry on her behalf. "You seem stronger today," he said, stepping out to join her in the clearing. Mila opened her eyes, offering him a small, genuine smile, one of the first she had given him since her arrival. "I feel stronger," she admitted. "I did not think I would ever feel warm again after that night." "The forest can be unforgiving to those unprepared for it," Draven said. "You are fortunate you found the cabin when you did." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, though the gesture seemed less about the cold now, and more about something else entirely. "I still do not fully understand why you have been so kind to me. Most alphas in your position would have sent me away the moment they realized I did not belong here." Draven considered his answer carefully before speaking. There was a truth he had not yet shared with her, one that explained far more about his behavior than simple kindness alone. But he was not certain she was ready to hear it, not certain he fully understood it himself yet, despite the growing certainty settling into his chest with each passing day. "Some things," he said instead, "are worth protecting simply because they deserve protection. You did not ask for the life you were given, Mila. You do not deserve to be punished further for surviving it." She looked at him for a long moment, something vulnerable and searching in her expression, as though she were trying to determine whether his words could possibly be as sincere as they sounded. Whatever she found in his face seemed to satisfy something in her, because the tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and she nodded, accepting his answer even without fully understanding it. Over the following days, Draven began teaching her small things, practical skills she had never been given the chance to learn within her old pack. How to start a fire without relying on someone else to do it for her. How to move through the forest quietly, reading the signs of the land around her. How to defend herself, at least in small, basic ways, using the strength she had never been encouraged to discover in herself before. "You are stronger than you believe," he told her one afternoon, after she successfully pinned him during a simple defensive exercise, more through determination than actual skill, though he did not tell her that. Her face lit up with surprised pride, and something in Draven's chest tightened at the sight of it, at the realization that no one had ever bothered to help her discover this strength before now. "I was always told Omegas were not meant to fight," she said, still slightly breathless from the exertion. That we were meant to be protected, not to protect ourselves. Being protected and being capable are not opposites, Draven replied. A person can be both. You should never have been made to believe otherwise. Mila absorbed his words in silence, turning them over carefully, testing them against years of conditioning that told her something entirely different. It would take more than a few days, more than a few lessons, to undo the damage inflicted by a lifetime of being told she was less capable, less deserving, less important than those around her. But here, in this quiet cabin surrounded by snow and silence, she found herself slowly beginning to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, everything she had been taught about her own worth had been wrong from the very beginning. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as they sat together preparing a simple meal, that Mila finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been sitting heavy in her chest since her first morning in the cabin. "What did you mean?" she asked carefully, "when you said there was something about me you did not fully understand yourself?" Draven's hands stilled over the vegetables he had been cutting. He set the knife aside and met her gaze directly, something serious and unguarded in his expression that she had not seen from him before. "There is a bond," he said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care, "that sometimes forms between two people. One that neither of them chooses consciously, but that exists regardless, waiting to be recognized. I believe such a bond may exist between us." Mila's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of such bonds throughout her life, stories of mates destined to find each other, though she had always assumed such things were reserved for others, never for someone like her, someone who had been told repeatedly that she was unworthy of anything so significant. "How can you be certain?" she asked quietly, unable to keep the uncertainty from her voice. "I am not entirely certain," Draven admitted. "Such bonds are not always immediate or obvious. But from the moment I found you asleep by my fire, something in me recognized something in you, something I have not felt with anyone else in all my years leading this territory." Mila sat with his words for a long moment, feeling the weight of them settle over her like the snow blanketing the world outside. Part of her wanted to run from the intensity of what he was suggesting, wary of trusting anything that seemed too significant, too important, after a lifetime of being told her feelings and instincts did not matter. But another part of her, quieter and more honest, recognized the truth in what he said, recognized the strange, steady pull she had felt toward him since that very first morning, a pull she had not yet allowed herself to name. "I do not know what to do with that," she admitted finally. "I do not know how to trust something so significant, not after everything I have survived." "You do not have to know," Draven said gently. "I am not asking you to accept anything before you are ready. I am simply telling you the truth, because you deserve honesty, even when it is complicated." His willingness to be patient with her, to offer truth without demanding immediate acceptance in return, settled something anxious in Mila's chest that she had not realized was there. She had spent so long being handled, being told what to feel and how to behave, that his simple respect for her own timeline felt like its own quiet gift. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not pushing me." "You have been pushed enough in your life," Draven replied. "I have no interest in adding to that burden." That night, as Mila lay beneath warm blankets listening to the quiet crackle of the dying fire, she found herself thinking not of the pack she had fled, nor of the fear that had chased her through the storm, but of the steady, careful way Draven had spoken to her that evening, of the strange, undeniable pull she felt toward him, despite every instinct telling her to remain cautious. She did not yet understand what it meant to be someone's fated mate. She did not yet fully trust the bond he described, or her own ability to recognize something so significant after a lifetime of learning to distrust her own instincts. But for the first time since fleeing into that terrible storm, she found herself hoping, quietly and carefully, that whatever waited for her ahead might finally be something good. Outside, the winter night stretched on, cold and clear and full of stars, while inside the cabin, two people continued the slow, careful work of learning to trust something neither of them had expected to find. Days turned into a week, and the cabin that had once felt like a stranger's shelter slowly began to feel, in small and unexpected ways, like something closer to a home. Mila found herself waking earlier each morning, no longer dreading the day ahead, but looking forward to the quiet routines that had formed between herself and Draven. Routines built from simple things, shared meals, and small lessons, and long conversations that stretched late into the evening. She had not forgotten the pack she left behind, though the memories no longer gripped her with the same suffocating fear they once had. Distance, and safety, and the steady presence of someone who treated her with genuine respect, had begun to loosen the hold her old life once had over her mind. But she knew, even as she allowed herself to settle into this new rhythm, that the past rarely stayed buried for long, especially not for someone who had left behind unfinished business with people unwilling to let go easily. Draven knew it too, though he kept his growing concerns carefully hidden from her, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace she had only just begun to find. He had received word, through his network of scouts and messengers, that her former pack had noticed her absence and had begun searching, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency, as days passed without any sign of her return. He did not yet know how far they were willing to go to reclaim her, but he suspected, based on everything Mila had shared about her treatment within that pack, that they would not simply let her go without a fight. He chose, for now, to keep this information to himself, wanting to give her a little more time before the weight of that reality settled back onto her shoulders. There would be time enough for difficult conversations. For now, he focused on continuing the slow, careful work of helping her heal, of showing her, through consistent action rather than empty words, that she deserved far better than what she had known before. "You have been quiet today," Mila observed one afternoon, watching him from across the cabin as he sharpened a blade with careful, practiced movements. "Is something troubling you?" Draven considered lying, considered offering some easy reassurance to spare her from unnecessary worry. But he had promised her honesty, and he intended to keep that promise, even when honesty was inconvenient. "There has been word from beyond my borders," he said carefully. "Your former pack has noticed you are missing. They are searching for you." Mila's face paled, old fear flickering behind her eyes, before she visibly forced herself to remain steady. "Do they know I am here?" "Not yet," Draven said. "This territory is well protected, and my people are loyal, but I did not want to keep this from you. You deserve to know the truth of what is happening, even when it is difficult to hear." She was quiet for a long moment, processing his words, old instincts warring with the new, tentative confidence she had begun building over the past several days. "What happens if they find me?" she asked finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "They will not take you against your will," Draven said, his voice carrying a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. "Not while you are under my protection. I promise you that, Mila." The conviction in his voice settled something anxious in her chest, though the fear did not disappear entirely. She had learned, through painful experience, that promises from those in power were not always reliable, that words offered easily could be broken just as easily when circumstances shifted. But everything she had witnessed from Draven over the past week suggested he was not the kind of alpha who made promises carelessly. "Why does my safety matter so much to you?" she asked quietly. "You barely know me." Draven set aside the blade he had been sharpening and met her gaze directly, something raw and honest in his expression. "I know enough," he said. "I know that you survived years of cruelty without losing your kindness. I know that you found the strength to run toward an uncertain future rather than accept a life you did not choose. I know that despite everything you have endured, you still ask thoughtful questions and still show genuine concern for people around you, myself included. That tells me more about who you are than years of casual acquaintance ever could." Mila felt tears sting her eyes at his words, overwhelmed by the simple, direct way he saw her, so different from the dismissive judgment she had grown used to receiving from others. "No one has ever spoken about me that way before," she admitted softly. "Then the people around you failed to see what was right in front of them," Draven said. "Their failure does not diminish your worth, Mila. It only reveals their own limitations." She did not know how to respond to such simple, unwavering kindness, so she simply allowed herself to sit with it, letting his words settle into places within her that had long been starved of such affirmation. Slowly, cautiously, she was beginning to understand that perhaps the way her old pack had treated her said far more about their own failures than about any lack of worth on her part. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Draven shared more of his own history with her, offering pieces of himself in return for the trust she had extended to him. He spoke of the difficult path that had led him to become Alpha King, of battles fought and losses endured, of the loneliness that often accompanied a position of such significant power. He spoke of years spent believing he would never find a genuine connection with anyone, too burdened by responsibility, and too wary of those who might seek to use him for his position, rather than value him for himself. "I did not expect to find you," he admitted quietly. "I did not expect to find anyone, not truly. But something about you, Mila, has changed the way I see what might be possible for my future." She reached across the small space between them, taking his hand in hers, a small gesture that felt enormous given everything it represented. "I did not expect to find safety," she said softly. "I did not expect to find someone who would see me as more than what I was told I was worth, but I am finding that here, with you." Their hands remained joined as the fire burned steadily beside them, casting warm light across the small cabin, while outside, the winter world remained blanketed in snow and silence. Neither of them spoke further, content to simply sit together in the quiet understanding that had grown between them, a bond neither fully understood yet, but both had begun, in their own careful ways, to trust. Later that night, long after Mila had fallen asleep, Draven remained awake by the dying fire, his thoughts turning toward the challenges he sensed were still ahead. Her former pack would not give up their search easily, not if the picture she had painted of their character held true. He would need to prepare, to strengthen his defenses, to ensure that when the moment eventually came, as he suspected it would, he was fully ready to protect what had quickly become the most important presence in his life. He watched her sleep peacefully across the room, her expression finally soft and untroubled, in a way it rarely had been during her waking hours, and felt a fierce, protective resolve settle deep into his chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them without hesitation. He had spent years building his strength, his territory, his reputation. He finally understood, watching this quiet, resilient woman sleep safely under his protection, exactly what all of it had been building toward. The following days brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere surrounding the cabin. Draven began spending more time away, though he always returned before dark, and Mila noticed the increased presence of watchful figures moving through the tree line at the edges of the clearing, silent sentries positioned there with quiet purpose. She understood, without needing to ask, that these were Draven's warriors, stationed to ensure her continued safety, as word of the search for her spread further across the region. She had expected the increased security to make her feel more anxious, more aware of the danger still hovering at the edges of her new life. Instead, she found a strange sort of comfort in it, a tangible reminder that she was no longer facing threats entirely alone. For years, she had learned to manage every difficulty by herself, to expect no support, no protection, no one standing ready to help shoulder her burdens. The presence of Draven's warriors, quiet and watchful along the tree line, represented something she had never truly experienced before, a community willing to stand between her and harm. "You do not have to look so surprised every time someone shows you kindness," Draven observed one evening, watching her reaction as one of his warriors, a young woman named Elena, brought fresh supplies to the cabin and offered Mila a warm, genuine smile before departing. "I am still learning," Mila admitted. "It is strange, having people care about my well-being without expecting anything difficult in return." "That strangeness will fade with time," Draven said gently. "This is simply how people are meant to treat each other. What you experienced before was the aberration, not this." Mila turned his words over carefully, trying to internalize a truth that still felt foreign despite the growing evidence supporting it. Elena's kindness, offered so easily and without any hidden agenda, represented one small piece of a much larger puzzle she was slowly beginning to understand, that the cruelty she had known within her old pack reflected the failures of specific individuals, not some universal truth about her own worth or the nature of packs in general. As the days passed, Mila found herself growing closer, not only to Draven, but to the small community that surrounded him. Elena, in particular, became something close to a friend, visiting often and sharing stories about life within Draven's territory, that painted a picture entirely different from the harsh, hierarchical cruelty Mila had known before. "He is different, you know," Elena told her one afternoon, as the two women sat together preparing herbs for the evening meal. "Draven, I mean. Most alphas in his position rule through fear. He rules through respect. It makes all the difference in how this territory functions." "How did he come to lead this way?" Mila asked, curious to understand more about the man who had so completely upended her expectations of what power could look like. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "He lost his parents young, in a conflict caused by an alpha who ruled purely through cruelty and intimidation. Draven watched that kind of leadership destroy everything it touched. When he eventually rose to power himself, he made a choice to build something different, something sustainable, built on loyalty rather than fear." The story settled something important into place for Mila, helping her understand more fully the quiet strength and deliberate kindness she had witnessed in Draven since her arrival. His gentleness was not weakness, nor was it simply a temporary kindness extended toward a stranger in need. It reflected a deeply held philosophy, forged through personal loss and years of careful, intentional leadership. That evening, as Mila and Draven sat together after a simple meal, she found herself sharing this new understanding with him. "Elena told me about your parents," she said carefully. "About the alpha who ruled through fear before you built something different." Draven's expression grew momentarily distant, old grief flickering behind his eyes before he composed himself. "It is not a story I share often," he admitted, "but I am not surprised Elena mentioned it. She was there, in a sense, though she was young at the time. Many of my closest advisors experienced that difficult period alongside me. I am sorry," Mila said softly, "for what you lost." "It was a long time ago," Draven replied, though the quiet weight in his voice suggested the loss still carried significant meaning for him even now. "But it taught me something important, something I have carried with me ever since, that power without compassion inevitably destroys everything it touches, including the person who wields it." Mila reached for his hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them over the past days. "You built something beautiful from that pain," she said, "a whole territory that reflects a better way of living." Draven turned to look at her, something warm and grateful in his expression. "I did not build it alone," he said. "It took the trust and loyalty of many people who believed a different way was possible. But hearing you say that it means something, that it reflects something beautiful rather than simply necessary, means more to me than you likely realize." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the fire casting warm light across the small cabin, before Mila spoke again, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what you told me before, about the bond you believe exists between us." Draven's attention sharpened immediately, though he remained patient, waiting for her to continue at her own pace. "I do not fully understand it," she admitted, "but I have felt something, since that first morning, something I cannot quite explain through logic alone, a pull toward you that feels different from anything I have experienced before." "That is the bond," Draven said softly. "Recognizing itself in you, just as it has been recognizing itself in me since the moment I found you asleep by my fire." "I am still afraid," Mila admitted honestly, "not of you, but of trusting something so significant after everything I have survived. What if I allow myself to hope, to truly believe in this, and it turns out to be a mistake?" Draven reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch careful and reverent in a way that made her breath catch. "I cannot promise you certainty," he said. "No one can when it comes to matters of the heart, but I can promise you patience and honesty and a genuine commitment to building trust with you slowly, at whatever pace feels right for you. I am not asking you to leap blindly into something uncertain. I am simply asking you to allow yourself the possibility of something good." Mila felt tears gather in her eyes, overwhelmed by the gentle sincerity of his words, by the careful respect he continued to show for her fear, even as he expressed his own growing feelings. "I would like that," she whispered finally, "the possibility of something good." The fire crackled steadily between them as the evening deepened into night, and for the first time since fleeing into the storm that had changed everything, Mila allowed herself to fully believe that perhaps, despite every fear and every painful lesson from her past, she had genuinely found her way towards something worth trusting. Outside, Draven's warriors continued their quiet watch along the tree line, ensuring that whatever threats remained beyond the borders of this small, peaceful world would find no easy path toward disturbing the fragile, precious trust that continued to grow steadily between two people who had never expected to find each other, but who now could not imagine their futures without one another. 2 weeks had passed since Mila first stumbled into Draven's cabin, and the transformation within her had become impossible to ignore, even to herself. She stood taller now, spoke more freely, allowed herself to laugh without immediately catching the sound and swallowing it back, an old habit born from years of being told her joy was an inconvenience to those around her. Draven noticed every small change, took quiet pride in each one, though he never drew attention to her growth in ways that might make her self-conscious about it. Instead, he simply continued showing up, day after day, with the same steady patience and genuine respect he had offered from the very beginning. Their conversations grew easier, more natural, filled with shared laughter and comfortable silences that no longer felt uncertain, but familiar, welcome. One crisp morning, as pale sunlight filtered through bare branches outside, Draven suggested they venture further from the cabin than Mila had yet traveled, wanting to show her more of the territory that had become her temporary home. She agreed eagerly, curious to see beyond the small clearing that had defined her world since her arrival. They walked together through the quiet forest, Draven pointing out landmarks and explaining the history of different areas as they passed, his knowledge of the land clearly extensive, built from years of careful stewardship. Mila listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, absorbing details about the territory he had worked so hard to protect and nurture. Eventually, they reached a small overlook, where the trees parted to reveal a sweeping view of the valley below, snow-covered hills, stretching toward a distant horizon, painted in soft winter light. Mila stopped, breath catching at the unexpected beauty spread before her. "It is beautiful," she said softly, moving closer to the edge to take in the full view. "I come here often," Draven admitted, standing beside her, "especially when the weight of leadership feels particularly heavy. There is something grounding about remembering how vast the world is, beyond the immediate concerns of any single day." Mila glanced at him, struck by the vulnerability in his admission. "Do you often feel that weight?" she asked. "The responsibility of leading so many people?" "More often than most would assume," he said honestly. "Power looks appealing from the outside, but very few people understand the constant weight of decisions that affect not just your own life, but the lives of everyone depending on your judgment. I do not regret the path I have chosen. But it is rarely as simple as it appears." "You carry it well," Mila said. "I do not think I would have survived even a fraction of what you manage daily." Draven turned to look at her fully, something intense and searching in his expression. "You survived years of cruelty that would have broken many people entirely," he said. "You found the strength to run toward an uncertain future, rather than accept a life that diminished you. Do not underestimate your own resilience, Mila. It is considerable, even if you have not yet fully recognized it in yourself." His words settled deep into her chest, another small piece added to the slowly growing foundation of self-worth she had begun building since her arrival in his territory. She had spent so long believing herself weak, incapable, unworthy of significant consideration, that hearing him speak so confidently about her strength still felt startling, even after weeks of similar affirmations. They stood together at the overlook for a while longer, comfortable silence stretching between them as they took in the vast winter landscape spread below. Eventually, Draven spoke again, his voice quieter now, more careful. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Though I want you to know, you are free to answer honestly, without concern for how your answer might affect our current arrangement." Mila turned to face him fully, curiosity and slight apprehension mingling in her expression. "What is it?" "Now that you have had time to heal, and time to consider your circumstances more clearly," Draven said carefully, "what do you want for your future? I do not wish to assume that remaining here, with me, is automatically the path you would choose, even if the bond between us continues to grow. Your choices matter, Mila. I want to understand what you genuinely want, not simply what circumstances have led you toward." The question struck her with unexpected force, partly because no one had ever asked her such a thing before, had ever expressed genuine interest in what she wanted, beyond what was expected or demanded of her. She considered his question seriously, searching within herself for an honest answer, rather than simply offering whatever response might please him most. "I want to feel safe," she said slowly, working through her thoughts as she spoke them aloud. "Not just physically safe, though that matters too, but safe enough to be myself, without fear of punishment or judgment. I want to matter to the people around me, not because of what I can offer them, but simply because of who I am." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "I have found more of that here, with you, in these past 2 weeks, than I found in my entire life before this." "And is that enough?" Draven asked quietly. "To build a future around?" "I think," Mila said carefully, "that it might be exactly enough. More than enough, actually. But I also think I am still learning what it means to want things for myself, rather than simply accepting whatever is given to me. I hope you can be patient with me as I continue figuring that out." "I have all the patience in the world for you," Draven said, and the sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. They began walking back toward the cabin as afternoon light began shifting toward evening, their conversation drifting into easier topics, shared observations about the landscape around them, quiet questions about each other's preferences and small joys. It was, Mila realized somewhere along the walk, the kind of easy companionship she had never truly experienced before, built not on obligation or fear, but on genuine mutual interest and respect. As they approached the cabin, Elena met them at the edge of the clearing, her expression carrying a seriousness that immediately shifted the mood between them. "There is news," she said, glancing between Draven and Mila with obvious concern. "Scouts have spotted movement near the eastern border. It appears her former pack has finally located this territory." Mila felt her stomach drop, old fear rushing back with sudden, overwhelming force. Draven's expression hardened immediately, protective instinct sharpening every line of his features, though his voice remained steady when he spoke. "How many? And how close?" he asked. Already shifting into the focused, decisive leadership Mila had glimpsed only occasionally during her time in his territory. "A small scouting party, several miles out," Elena reported. "Not an immediate threat, but clearly searching with purpose. They will likely reach the border within the next day or two." Draven turned to Mila, his expression softening slightly, despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "This changes nothing about my commitment to your safety," he said firmly, "but it does mean we need to prepare more carefully for what may come next." Mila nodded, fear tangled with a new, unfamiliar resolve settling into her chest. She had run once already, fleeing into an uncertain storm rather than accept a life that diminished her. She was not the same frightened, broken woman who had collapsed onto Draven's cabin floor 2 weeks earlier. Whatever challenges awaited in the coming days, she intended to face them not as a victim fleeing danger, but as someone finally beginning to understand her own strength. "I am not running again," she said quietly, determination steadying her voice. "Whatever happens next, I want to face it directly, not hide from it." Draven studied her for a long moment, something like pride mixing with his obvious concern. "Then we will face it together," he said. "Whatever comes." The sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon as the three of them made their way back toward the cabin, the peaceful rhythm of the past 2 weeks giving way to the sharper, more urgent reality of challenges that could no longer be postponed. But even as uncertainty loomed on the horizon, Mila found herself steadied by something new, something she had never quite possessed before. The quiet confidence that came from knowing she no longer faced her fears entirely alone. News of the scouting party spread quickly through Draven's territory, and by the following morning, the quiet cabin that had become Mila's sanctuary buzzed with a different kind of energy entirely. Warriors moved with purpose along the tree line, messengers came and went carrying updates from the eastern border, and Draven himself seemed to occupy 2 roles at once: the gentle presence Mila had come to know intimately, and the formidable Alpha King whose reputation had once made her tremble before she understood the man behind the title. "They have stopped just short of the border," Draven reported that evening, having spent most of the day coordinating with his warriors and gathering intelligence about the situation. "It appears they are waiting, perhaps hoping to gather more information before making any direct move. "What do you think they will do?" Mila asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Though the old fear continued creeping back in stronger waves, the closer her past drew toward her present. "I do not yet know," Draven admitted honestly. "But I want you to understand something clearly, Mila. Whatever they attempt, they will not succeed in taking you against your will. This territory, and everyone within it, stands firmly committed to your protection." His certainty offered some comfort, though the anxiety twisting through her chest refused to fully settle. She had spent years learning to fear the pack she had left behind, learning that resistance rarely succeeded against those determined to enforce their will regardless of consequence. Trusting that this situation might unfold differently required a leap of faith she was still learning to make. "Kellen will not simply give up," she said quietly, voicing the fear that had haunted her since Elena's initial report. "He does not handle losing what he considers his property well." Draven's jaw tightened at her words, protective anger flashing briefly across his expression, before he composed himself. "You are not property, Mila. Not his, not anyone's. And whatever entitlement he believes he holds over you, it means nothing within my territory." Mila appreciated his conviction, though old patterns of fear were not so easily dismissed. She had lived so long under Kellen's shadow, had learned the particular danger of his temper when challenged or denied something he believed belonged to him. The thought of him standing at the border of Draven's territory, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what he considered rightfully his, sent chills through her that had nothing to do with the winter cold. That night, sleep proved elusive, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios despite Draven's reassurances. She eventually gave up trying to rest entirely, moving quietly to sit beside the dying fire, watching the last embers glow against the darkness. She had not heard Draven wake, had not realized he was watching her, until his voice broke the silence. "You cannot sleep," he observed, moving to join her by the fire. "I keep thinking about what might happen," she admitted. "About what Kellen might do, what lengths he might go to reclaim me." Draven settled beside her, close enough that his presence offered quiet comfort without demanding anything from her. "Tell me about him," he said gently. "Not because I need convincing of the danger he represents, but because I think perhaps you have never had the chance to speak freely about what you experienced, without fear of consequence for the honesty." Mila considered his invitation carefully, old instincts warning her against vulnerability even now, even here, in a place that had proven itself safe time and again. But something about the quiet trust that had grown between them over the past weeks gave her the courage to finally speak openly about experiences she had spent years minimizing, even to herself. She told him about the years of subtle cruelty disguised as discipline, about being told repeatedly that her worth existed only in relation to how useful she could be to others. She told him about the years of subtle cruelty disguised as discipline. She told him about the mounting pressure as she grew older, the increasing insistence that she accept a bond with Kellen despite never being asked whether she wanted such a future for herself. She told him about the morning she finally ran, about the particular cruelty in his eyes when he grabbed her wrist and declared, in front of the entire pack, that her preferences no longer mattered. Draven listened without interruption, his expression carefully controlled, despite the obvious anger simmering beneath the surface throughout her account. When she finally finished speaking, exhausted by the weight of memories she had rarely allowed herself to fully examine, he reached for her hand, holding it gently. "None of what happened to you was acceptable," he said firmly. "Not the years of cruelty, not the attempt to force a bond upon you without consent, none of it. You deserved so much better than what that pack offered you, and I am deeply sorry you endured any of it." "I used to believe I deserved it," Mila admitted quietly, "that there was something inherently lacking in me that justified how I was treated." "There is nothing lacking in you," Draven said, his voice carrying quiet, fierce conviction. "The failure belonged entirely to those who treated you cruelly. Their inability to recognize your worth reflects their own limitations, not any deficiency in you." Tears slipped down Mila's cheeks, though they felt different from the tears she had cried so often within her old pack, born not of despair but of something closer to release, the slow unburdening of years of accumulated pain, finally being witnessed and validated by someone who genuinely cared. Draven pulled her gently into his arms, holding her while she cried, offering silent, steady comfort, without demanding she compose herself or apologize for the vulnerability. "I am grateful you found your way here," he said softly, once her tears had finally quieted. "Grateful that whatever forces led you to my cabin that night brought you somewhere you could finally begin healing from everything you endured." "I am grateful too," Mila whispered, her voice muffled slightly against his shoulder. "More grateful than I know how to properly express." They remained together by the fire for a long while, the quiet intimacy of the moment offering both of them a measure of peace despite the uncertainty still looming at the borders of the territory. Eventually, exhaustion overtook them both, and they fell asleep together beside the dying embers, finding rest in each other's presence, despite the challenges that awaited with the coming dawn. Morning brought fresh news, delivered urgently by one of Draven's scouts as the first light broke over the horizon. The scouting party at the eastern border had grown overnight, additional warriors arriving to reinforce their position, their intentions becoming increasingly clear with each passing hour. "They are preparing to approach the border directly," the scout reported, his expression grave. "It appears they intend to make a formal demand for her return." Draven's expression hardened into the focused, commanding presence Mila had glimpsed only rarely during her weeks in his territory. "Gather my senior warriors," he instructed. "We will meet them at the border, on our terms, not theirs." He turned to Mila, his expression softening slightly, despite the tension evident throughout his posture. "This is the moment we discussed," he said. "Are you ready to face this directly, or would you prefer to remain here while I handle the confrontation myself?" Mila considered his question seriously, old fear warring against the new resolve that had been steadily building within her since her arrival. She thought of the frightened, broken woman who had collapsed onto his cabin floor weeks earlier, and she thought of who she had become since then, stronger, more confident, no longer willing to simply accept whatever fate others decided for her. "I want to be there," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear still coursing through her. "I am done letting others decide my future without my voice being heard. If Kellen wishes to make demands regarding my life, he will hear my answer directly, not secondhand through others." Draven studied her for a long moment, pride and protective concern mixing openly in his expression. "Then we will face this together," he said, "exactly as we discussed." Together, they prepared to meet whatever challenge awaited at the border, the quiet sanctuary of the past weeks, giving way to the more urgent reality of confrontation neither of them could avoid any longer. The eastern border stretched before them, a wide clearing marked by ancient stone markers that had divided the two territories for generations. Draven arrived with a contingent of his most trusted warriors, their presence a clear demonstration of strength, without crossing into open hostility. Mila walked beside him, her heart pounding, but her posture steady, refusing to let fear dictate how she carried herself in this pivotal moment. Across the clearing, the group from her former pack came into view, and Mila's stomach clenched at the sight of Kellen at their head, his expression carrying the same entitled arrogance she remembered so vividly from the morning she fled. Beside him stood several senior pack members, including her former alpha, a stern older man named Garrick, whose cold assessment swept across the clearing, as though calculating the value of everything he observed. "Draven," Garrick called out, his tone carrying forced civility that did little to mask the tension beneath it. "We did not expect to find our missing Omega sheltered within your territory." "Mila is not your missing anything," Draven replied evenly, his voice carrying clear authority despite its calm delivery. "She is a person who chose to leave circumstances that no longer served her well-being. She remains here now by her own choice, under my protection." Kellen's expression darkened, old entitlement flashing across his features. "She belongs to our pack," he said, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "She was promised to me. This is a matter for our territory to resolve, not yours." Mila felt the familiar urge to shrink back, to let the powerful men around her decide her fate through negotiation, while her own voice remained silent. But she thought of everything she had learned during her weeks with Draven, of the strength he had helped her recognize within herself, and she stepped forward instead, meeting Kellen's gaze directly for the first time since fleeing that terrible morning. "I do not belong to anyone," she said, her voice carrying more steadiness than she expected. I never agreed to any promise made on my behalf. You decided that bond without ever asking what I wanted, and I refused to accept a future built on decisions that were never mine to make." Kellen's face flushed with anger at being addressed so directly, clearly unaccustomed to any resistance from someone he had long considered beneath serious consideration. "You do not have the right to simply refuse arrangements made for the good of the pack," he snapped. "Omegas do not get to choose their own paths. That has never been how our pack operates." "Then perhaps it is time your pack's traditions changed," Draven said, stepping slightly forward, his presence radiating quiet, controlled power that made even Garrick's confident posture waver slightly. "Every person, regardless of designation, deserves the right to choose their own future. Mila has made her choice clear. She does not wish to return with you, and I will not permit her to be taken against her will." Garrick's cold gaze shifted toward Draven, calculation evident in his expression, as he weighed the implications of open conflict against a territory as powerful as Draven's. "This could easily become a matter of significant consequence between our territories," he said carefully. "Are you certain you wish to risk conflict over a single Omega?" "I am certain," Draven replied without hesitation, "that I will not stand aside while someone under my protection is threatened or coerced. If you wish to pursue this matter further, you will find my territory fully prepared to defend what it values, including the people who call it home." Silence stretched across the clearing, as Garrick considered his options, clearly recognizing the significant risk in escalating conflict against an Alpha King known for both his strength and the fierce loyalty of his people. Kellen, however, seemed less inclined toward caution, his anger overriding whatever strategic calculations his Alpha might be weighing. "This is not finished," Kellen snarled, taking a step forward despite Garrick's warning glance. "She belongs to our pack, and I will not simply allow her to be stolen away because some powerful Alpha decided he wanted her for himself." "I did not steal anything," Draven said, his voice hardening slightly despite remaining controlled. "Mila came to my territory, seeking safety from circumstances that caused her genuine harm. She remains here because she chooses to, not because I have taken anything from your pack that was never rightfully yours to claim in the first place." Mila watched the exchange with a strange sense of clarity settling over her, watching Kellen's anger and entitlement laid bare against Draven's calm, principled resolve. The contrast between the two men could not have been more striking, and she found herself grateful, more deeply than words could express, for the fortune that had led her stumbling into Draven's territory rather than any other shelter she might have found that terrible night. "I have made my choice," she said again, addressing both Kellen and Garrick directly. "I will not return to a pack that treated my well-being as inconsequential, that attempted to force me into a bond I never wanted. Whatever consequences you believe should follow my departure, I am prepared to face them, because remaining here, in a place where I am valued rather than merely used, matters more to me than anything you could threaten me with." Her words hung in the cold air, resolute and clear, and something shifted in Garrick's expression, a grudging recognition perhaps, or simply the calculated understanding that pursuing this conflict further offered little benefit against significant risk. He placed a restraining hand on Kellen's shoulder, quieting his younger pack members' continued protests. "We will withdraw for now," Garrick said finally, his tone carrying the careful diplomacy of someone choosing to avoid unnecessary conflict rather than genuine acceptance of the outcome. "But know that this matter may not be entirely settled. There are political considerations beyond simple sentiment that may require further discussion. I am prepared to discuss any legitimate concerns through proper channels," Draven replied evenly. "But Mila's autonomy and safety are not subjects open for negotiation. That much remains entirely non-negotiable." Garrick nodded stiffly, clearly recognizing the futility of pressing further in this moment, and turned to lead his group back toward their own territory, though Kellen lingered a moment longer, his gaze locked on Mila with an intensity that sent a fresh chill through her, despite Draven's protective presence beside her. "This is not over," Kellen said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that made Mila's skin prickle with old, familiar fear. "You will regret choosing him over your own pack." "I have never regretted a choice less," Mila replied steadily, refusing to let his intimidation shake the resolve she had worked so hard to build. Kellen's jaw tightened, But Garrick's sharp call finally pulled him away, and the group from her former pack withdrew across the border, disappearing gradually into the tree line until the clearing fell silent once more, leaving only Draven's warriors and the two of them standing together in the aftermath of the confrontation. Draven turned to her immediately, concern evident in his expression despite the successful outcome of their meeting. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Mila took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to ease from her system. "I think so," she said, genuine surprise coloring her voice. "I did not expect to feel this strong, standing there facing him directly." "You were remarkable," Draven said, pride evident in every word. "The way you spoke, the clarity and conviction in your voice, that took tremendous courage." "I had good reason to find that courage," Mila said, offering him a small, grateful smile. "You showed me, over these past weeks, that I deserved to have my voice heard. I simply finally believed it enough to use it." As they made their way back toward the cabin, the weight of the confrontation slowly lifting from their shoulders, both of them understood that Kellen's parting words carried genuine warning. Whatever peace they had secured today likely represented only a temporary reprieve, not a final resolution. But for now, standing together in the quiet aftermath of successfully defending the life she had chosen for herself, Mila allowed herself to feel, if only briefly, the simple satisfaction of a victory hard won and genuinely deserved. The days following the confrontation at the border carried a different kind of tension than what had come before. While Mila had proven her resolve, and Draven's territory had demonstrated its willingness to defend her, both understood that Garrick's mention of political considerations suggested the conflict was far from truly settled. Kellen's parting threat lingered in the back of Mila's mind, a persistent reminder that peace, however hard won, could prove fragile against determined opposition. Draven spent increasing time in consultation with his advisors, working through the political complexities that might arise from the situation. Territories throughout the region operated under a complex web of alliances and rivalries, and an Alpha King openly defending an Omega from another pack, particularly one who had fled rather than accepting an arranged bond, carried implications that extended well beyond the immediate circumstances. "There are some who will see this as a challenge to established traditions," Draven explained to Mila one evening as they reviewed the latest reports from his network of allies and informants. "Traditions that many packs, including some who might otherwise remain neutral, hold as fundamental to their social structure." "Do you regret defending me?" Mila asked, worry creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain composed. "Never," Draven said immediately, without a trace of hesitation. "I regret only that the situation has grown complicated enough to require such careful navigation. But my commitment to your safety and autonomy remains absolute, regardless of whatever political complications arise from it." His unwavering certainty offered comfort, though Mila could not fully shake the guilt that settled over her, the fear that her presence in his life had created burdens he would not otherwise need to carry. She voiced this concern quietly one evening, unable to keep the worry contained any longer. "Perhaps I should have simply continued running," she said, "found somewhere else to hide, somewhere that would not have drawn you into conflict with my former pack." Draven set aside the papers he had been reviewing, giving her his complete attention, his expression gentle but firm. "Do not diminish what has happened between us by suggesting you should have avoided it," he said. "Yes, this situation has grown complicated. Yes, there may be difficult conversations and negotiations ahead. But I would choose this path again without hesitation, every single time, because what has grown between us matters more than any temporary political inconvenience. I do not want to be the reason your territory faces unnecessary conflict," Mila said, her voice thick with the weight of genuine concern. "You are not causing conflict," Draven said firmly. "Kellen's inability to accept your right to choose your own future is causing this conflict. His entitlement and Garrick's political calculations are responsible for whatever difficulty follows, not your legitimate need for safety and autonomy. I need you to understand that distinction clearly, Mila." She absorbed his words slowly, working to internalize the difference he described, difficult as it was after years of being taught that any inconvenience she caused, regardless of its true source, ultimately reflected some failing on her own part. But everything Draven had shown her since her arrival suggested a different, healthier way of understanding responsibility and blame, and she found herself, gradually, beginning to trust his perspective over the deeply ingrained patterns of her past. Word arrived several days later that Garrick had called for a formal gathering of regional alphas, intending to discuss what he characterized as a significant breach of traditional pack protocol. Draven received the summons with careful consideration, understanding the delicate balance required to navigate the situation without either compromising his principles or unnecessarily escalating conflict that could affect far more than just his own territory. "I will attend," he told Mila, once the details of the gathering had been finalized. "It is important that I represent our position directly, rather than allowing others to characterize the situation without my voice present." "I want to come with you," Mila said immediately, her tone leaving little room for argument. "This concerns my future directly. I should be there to speak for myself, just as I did at the border." Draven studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the potential risks against her evident determination. "It may not be an easy environment," he said carefully. "Many of the alphas attending will hold traditional views that do not align with the choices you have made." "I understand that," Mila said. "But I have spent enough of my life allowing others to speak for me, to decide my future without my input. I am not willing to remain silent now, especially regarding something so significant." Something like fierce pride flickered across Draven's expression at her resolve. "Then we will attend together," he agreed. "And you will have every opportunity to speak your truth, exactly as you did at the border." Preparations for the gathering occupied the following days, Draven working closely with his advisors to prepare careful, principled arguments, while also ensuring Mila felt genuinely supported and informed throughout the process. Elena spent considerable time with her as well, sharing insights about the political dynamics likely to be present at such a gathering, helping her feel more prepared for whatever challenges awaited. Many of the alphas attending built their positions on traditional hierarchies, Elena explained during one such conversation. "They may not respond well to an Omega speaking directly and confidently in such a setting, but do not let that discourage you. Draven's territory has earned significant respect throughout the region, precisely because of principles like the ones you are fighting to uphold." "What if my presence there only makes things more difficult for Draven?" Mila asked, the familiar worry resurfacing despite her growing confidence. "Draven chose this path with clear eyes," Elena said gently. "He understood the potential complications when he first decided to protect you, and he has never once expressed regret about that choice. Trust that he knows what he is doing, and trust that your voice matters in this conversation, regardless of how traditional some of those attending might be." Elena's words offered genuine comfort, and as the day of the gathering approached, Mila found herself steadying into a place of quiet, determined resolve. She thought back to the frightened, broken woman who had first collapsed onto Draven's cabin floor, comparing that memory against who she had become since then, and found herself grateful, deeply and genuinely, for every difficult step of the journey that had led her to this moment. The night before their departure for the gathering, Mila and Draven sat together by the familiar fire that had witnessed so much of their growing bond over the past weeks. The cabin felt different now than it had during her first exhausted, terrified night there, transformed by weeks of shared meals, quiet conversations, and the slow, careful building of genuine trust between them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Draven said quietly, taking her hand in his, "I want you to know that my commitment to you remains unwavering, regardless of the outcome. This gathering may complicate our circumstances, but it will not change how I feel about you, or my determination to see you live freely, safely, and on your own terms." "I know," Mila said softly, and she found, with quiet surprise, that she genuinely believed it, trusted it completely, in a way that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I am grateful beyond words that I found my way to you that night. Grateful for everything you have shown me about what genuine care and respect actually look like." They sat together as the fire burned low, drawing strength from each other's presence, preparing themselves for whatever challenges the following day might bring. Outside, the winter world remained quiet and still, holding its breath, it seemed, alongside them, as they prepared to face the most significant test yet of the bond that had grown between them against all expectation. The gathering hall stood at the center of neutral territory, a massive stone structure that had witnessed centuries of regional negotiations and disputes. Mila had never seen anything like it, the sheer scale of the building matched only by the weight of history evident in its ancient walls. As she and Draven entered together, flanked by a small contingent of his most trusted advisors, she felt the eyes of dozens of powerful alphas turn toward them, curiosity and judgment mingling openly in their expressions. Garrick stood near the front of the hall, Kellen positioned beside him with barely concealed satisfaction, clearly believing this formal setting would work in their favor. Mila steadied her breathing, drawing strength from Draven's steady presence beside her, and reminded herself of every step that had brought her to this moment. Every small piece of courage she had rebuilt since that terrible night she fled into the storm. The proceedings began with formal introductions, each alpha present given opportunity to state their position on the matter at hand. Garrick spoke first, framing the situation carefully, as a matter of broken tradition and pack sovereignty, his words calculated to appeal to the more conservative alphas among those gathered. An Omega belonging to our pack fled her responsibilities, and was subsequently sheltered by a neighboring territory. Garrick stated, his tone measured but pointed. This represents a significant challenge to the traditional structures that maintain order and stability across our region. We ask this gathering to affirm the principle that pack decisions regarding internal matters, including matters of bonding and belonging, should remain respected across territorial boundaries. Murmurs of consideration rippled through the assembled alphas, some nodding in apparent agreement with Garrick's framing, others remaining carefully neutral, waiting to hear the full scope of arguments before forming judgment. When it came time for Draven to respond, he rose with the same quiet, commanding presence Mila had witnessed at the border, though the weight of this larger audience seemed only to sharpen his resolve rather than diminish it. I would like to correct several aspects of the situation as presented, Draven began, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. Mila did not simply flee responsibilities. She fled a pack that had subjected her to years of documented cruelty, culminating in an attempt to force her into a bond she never consented to and never desired. She sought safety, not escape from legitimate obligation. Regardless of her reasons, Garrick interjected, the fundamental question remains whether packs retain authority over internal bonding decisions without external interference. The fundamental question, Draven countered, is whether any individual, regardless of designation, retains the right to refuse a bond they do not consent to, and whether other territories bear responsibility to protect individuals fleeing genuine harm, regardless of the pack structures they are fleeing from. The hall fell into tense silence, as the philosophical weight of his argument settled over the assembled alphas. Several exchanged uncertain glances, clearly reconsidering positions they had entered the gathering already prepared to hold. Sensing an opportunity, Draven turned toward Mila, extending an invitation with a simple nod. I would like Mila to speak for herself, he said, addressing the full assembly. This gathering concerns her future directly. She deserves the opportunity to be heard, rather than having her circumstances decided entirely through others speaking on her behalf. A murmur of surprise moved through the hall at the unusual request, though Draven standing within the region ensured no immediate objection was raised. Mila stepped forward, her heart pounding, every instinct from her old life screaming at her to remain silent, to let more powerful figures determine her fate through negotiation. But she thought of everything she had rebuilt over the past weeks, every piece of courage and self-worth she had reclaimed, and she found her voice steady when she finally spoke. I lived within my former pack for 22 years, she began, addressing the assembled alphas directly, refusing to let her gaze waver, despite the intensity of their collective attention. During that time, I was told repeatedly that my worth existed only in relation to how useful I could be to others. I was denied the opportunity to develop skills, to make decisions about my own life, to have any meaningful voice in matters that directly affected my future. When I was informed that a bond had been arranged for me, without my consent or consideration, I understood clearly that my autonomy had never genuinely mattered to those making decisions on my behalf. She paused, gathering her resolve before continuing. I did not flee my responsibilities. I fled a system that refused to acknowledge my basic right to choose my own future. Draven offered me shelter, safety, and genuine respect, without ever demanding anything in return. If this gathering upholds the principle that packs retain absolute authority over individuals, regardless of the harm those individuals experience, then this gathering upholds cruelty disguised as tradition. Her words echoed through the silent hall, and Mila watched as several alphas shifted uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering the simplified narrative Garrick had initially presented. Kellen's expression darkened with barely contained fury, though he remained silent, understanding perhaps that further outburst would only weaken his position further before this audience. An elder alpha near the front of the hall finally rose, his expression thoughtful as he addressed the assembly. "I have led my own territory for many decades," he said, "and I have witnessed the damage caused by rigid adherence to tradition without genuine consideration for the well-being of those affected by such traditions. This young woman speaks with clarity and courage that few possess, even among those who have lived far longer than her 22 years. I, for one, find her account, and Draven's defense of her autonomy, considerably more compelling than the narrative initially presented." Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the hall, and gradually, as more alphas voiced their own perspectives, the momentum of the gathering shifted decisively away from Garrick's initial framing. Even several alphas who held generally traditional views found themselves unable to fully justify supporting a forced bond built on documented cruelty and clear absence of consent. By the time formal deliberations concluded, the assembled alphas had reached a clear consensus. While pack sovereignty remained an important regional principle, it could not extend to justifying forced bonds or shielding documented abuse from external intervention. Mila's choice to remain under Draven's protection was formally recognized as legitimate, and Garrick's pack was cautioned against pursuing further action that might constitute genuine interference with her established autonomy. Garrick accepted the decision with visible reluctance, though the weight of regional consensus left little room for further challenge. Kellen, however, could not fully contain his fury, storming from the hall the moment formal proceedings concluded, though his departure carried no true power to alter the outcome that had just been secured. As the gathering dispersed, Draven turned to Mila, pride and relief evident throughout his expression. "You were extraordinary," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "Everything you said, the courage it took to stand before this entire assembly and speak your truth so clearly. I am in awe of you, Mila." "I could not have done it without everything you have taught me these past weeks," Mila replied, tears of relief and quiet triumph gathering in her eyes. "Without the safety you offered, the respect you showed me from the very beginning, I would never have found the strength to stand here today." "You always had that strength within you," Draven said gently. "I simply helped create the space for you to recognize it fully." They stood together in the emptying hall, the weight of the day's proceedings slowly settling into something closer to relief and quiet celebration. The formal recognition of her autonomy, secured before an assembly of powerful regional leaders, represented far more than simple legal protection. It represented, for Mila, the first time in her entire life that her voice, her choices, and her fundamental worth had been publicly and formally validated. They returned to Draven's territory as the sun began its descent, the journey home filled with quiet conversation and comfortable silence, both of them still processing the significance of what had been accomplished. As they finally approached the familiar cabin that had become the true beginning of everything meaningful in Mila's new life, Draven stopped, turning to face her fully in the fading afternoon light. "I know this journey has not been easy," he said softly. "The fear, the uncertainty, the difficult confrontations you have had to face. But I want you to know how genuinely proud I am of everything you have overcome, and how grateful I am that you found your way into my life, even under such difficult circumstances." "I am grateful too," Mila said, reaching up to gently touch his face, marveling at how naturally the gesture had come to feel between them. "For the safety, for the patience, for showing me what it truly means to be valued rather than simply used." "There is something I would like to ask you," Draven said, his voice carrying quiet vulnerability despite his usual steady confidence. "Not as your protector, not as the Alpha King who offered you shelter, but simply as Draven, the man who has fallen completely and irrevocably in love with you these past weeks. Would you consider building a genuine future here, with me, not out of necessity or circumstance, but because it is truly what you want for yourself. Mila felt her heart swell with an emotion she had never fully experienced before, pure and uncomplicated joy, untangled from fear or obligation, or the desperate need for simple survival. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and certain, despite the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. "I want that future, Draven. I want it more than I have ever wanted anything in my entire life." He pulled her into his arms, and standing together in the golden light of late afternoon, surrounded by the same forest that had once represented desperate flight and uncertain danger, Mila finally allowed herself to fully embrace the future stretching before her, one built not on fear or survival, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and the quiet, powerful strength she had rediscovered within herself. The cabin stood waiting behind them, no longer simply a stranger's shelter stumbled upon during a desperate storm, but the true beginning of a home, built on everything she had once believed impossible: safety freely given, respect genuinely earned, and love that asked nothing of her except the simple, precious gift of being fully and authentically herself. Winter would eventually give way to spring, and the territory that had become her home would continue flourishing under leadership built on compassion rather than fear. But standing there in that quiet, golden moment, wrapped in Draven's arms with her entire future stretching bright and hopeful before her, Mila understood clearly that the most important transformation had already been completed. She was no longer the frightened Omega who had once fled through a desperate storm, seeking nothing more than simple survival. She had become, through courage, resilience, and the patient love of someone who had recognized her worth from the very beginning, exactly who she was always meant to be.